Friends, Wilford Woodruff has a close place in my heart for two reasons. The first is because, well, I was a child. My parents had a very clear rule in the home that you were not allowed to watch anything that wasn't connected with the church before sacrament meeting. That was great when church was at 9 a.m. When you had the dreaded 1 p.m. slot in the local meeting house, it resulted in desperation for me and my two brothers. That desperation was helped by this scene that you may remember from the 1993 film, The Mountain of the Lord. I think I watched it on repeat on those 1 o'clock Sundays. So much so to this day, when I see a picture of Wilford Woodruff, I sometimes hesitate and go, wait, that's not what I remember. On a more serious note, Wilford Woodruff has a dear spot in my heart because my fourth great-grandfather, Jonathan Harriman Hale, served as one of his mission companions on his summer 1837 mission to the eastern states, Canada, and the Fox Islands. And as you'll be able to see here, this is an example from Wilford Woodruff's journals where he actually mentions Jonathan Harriman Hale as one of those whom he is laboring with. Interestingly enough, the research that I'm going to present today was part of my honors thesis at BYU when I was an undergraduate here a decade ago. I brought a copy of it with me and noticed that there's a lot of dust. So I'm sure the one in the Harold B. Lee Library is even dustier than mine is. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been able to review that research because a lot has happened in 10 years. When I did my research, grateful to the people at the Church History Library, but I was only allowed access to 2 of the journals to be able to verify the research that I had done from the typescript that Scott Kinney had put together. And so my research was limited. Now we have access to that. An additional component that you will see in the presentation today as well is that more and more research has been done on diaries of individuals from the 18th and 19th centuries, which helps us to better contextualize what Wilford Woodruff was doing. And so with those notes in mind, and again coming back to one of my favorite pictures of Wilford Woodruff here in fictitious form, I would like to start by saying while Wilford Woodruff's journals have been celebrated as one of the greatest records of the restored gospel, a prominent yet almost entirely ignored aspect of his journals is Woodruff's creation, implementation, and consistent drawing of symbols. Journals contemporaneous with Woodruff's appear to utilize illustrations and symbols in 2 ways. First, by producing intricate depictions of unusual sights, like those of unique animals or uncharted terrain, as can be seen in this example from the Lewis and Clark Expedition Journal. A second type are more simple and quickly produced drawings or illustrations that sometimes are hurried and quickly demarcate specific passages for future recollection, as can be seen by the simple black cross in this entry from Anne Lister's diary from 1817. Woodruff appears to illustrate his journals in both of these ways, but in a more complex manner. The series of symbols created by Woodruff are both comparative and unique when viewed alongside those commonly used by 19th century diarists. Woodruff used the first symbol of his journal in his 23 March 1837 entry, and you can see this drawing here at the bottom of the screen. Drawn here alongside a shorthand annotation within his journal. The first symbols implemented by Woodruff were used to easily distinguish an important journal entry, such as a 15 April 1837 account when he received his patriarchal blessing, or his 31 December 1837 account when he recorded his family history. There's my shout out to Rootstack as well, Jordan, to go with yours from earlier. This latter example is helpful if you will remember from those earlier images, because you see that Woodruff begins by marking the journal with a simple black X. This is repeated numerous times in his first journal, as is shown in these entries spanning from August 3rd to August 8th, 1837. This marking seems to be Woodruff's earliest attempt to demarcate entries that preserved information that was important to him and would make it easier for him to recall data without having to reread the entire journal. This method of demarcating certain entries or days with a simple black X or cross can be seen in other diaries from the 19th century, including the one that I showed earlier from Anne Lister, and also the diaries of Elizabeth Iqbal. These markings were intended to help the authors quickly recall or catalog valuable information. A similar motivation appears to be the case for these markings in Woodruff's journals, as many of the demarcated passages contain information that is accounted on the year-end summary pages at the end of each year. There we go, we've gotten to the boring part now. This is an example of one of those year-end pages that's giving a synopsis of what happened for the year 1837. These early symbols delineated an entry of import from usual daily events, while Woodruff uses these generic demarcations through the latter part of his first journal and sporadically thereafter. Beginning in his second journal, on the 6th of February, 1838, he begins to use specifically designed symbols repeatedly to distinguish important events from one another. Notice, if you would, that this first symbol indicates the writing of a letter to my fourth great-grandfather, Jonathan Harriman Hale. By the way, if anyone knows where that letter is, I'd be much appreciated to know where that might be. Before delving into the symbols, their meanings, and ultimately their utility in the Woodruff journals, it is important to note that scholars have been aware of Woodruff's drawings for over 50 years. Latter-day Saint scholars such as D. Michael Quinn and Laurel Thacker Ulrich have both drawn attention to Woodruff's artistic work. Additionally, Scott Kenny, in his typescript of the Woodruff journals, published between 1983 and 1985, preserved references to the illustrations in the text of the journals with his own symbols that could be decoded using a key that accompanied each published volume. This system oriented students of Woodruff's journals as to the approximate location of each drawing, though admittedly did not provide any type of explanation as to their meaning or purpose. These studies, while influential and insightful, focused on specific drawings or a component of Wilford Woodruff's journals. Today, I would like us to explore these drawings more holistically, to see how they functioned within the entirety of Woodruff's journals. In total, Woodruff drew nearly 9,000 illustrations throughout his 15 journal volumes. And as a side note, as I've continued to see more and more of the papers that the Wilford Woodruff Papers Foundation has put out and seen more things from Wilford Woodruff, these symbols also appear in other places. From my research, it appears that Woodruff utilized two types of drawings. First, a series of 18 symbols, and there's a collection of about 10 right here that you can look at, were used repeatedly to demarcate specific events similar to the black cross or X, but being uniquely drawn to account for specific activities. As you can see, these drawings are fairly hurried and crude in some nature, but they served their purpose in being able to reference what was happening. Earlier, Jennifer had mentioned that Wilford Woodruff had a drawing of Queen Victoria. That's the one in the bottom right-hand corner, by the way. I hope that was a laugh out of interest. If Wilford Woodruff is here with us today, then I hope he's not hoping we're mocking that. They look better than my drawings. Like Woodruff's transition from the black X in his journals to specific symbols in his second, his methodology evolves over time, resulting in the creation or combination of symbols and the elimination of symbols altogether in favor of others. The second group of symbols that we see in the Wilford Woodruff journals were created illustrations that depicted unique scenes that he was witness to. While the second group of drawings are of interest and valuable to study, due to our time constraints today, and because each drawing could facilitate a robust discussion that would occupy an entire conference themselves, we will not analyze them together. I'd like to contextualize these symbols that Wilford Woodruff will use repeatedly from 1838 onward. Although the 18 repeated symbols appear consistently and regularly throughout the journals, there is no designated position for them on the page or within individual entries, as can be seen in a couple of examples right here. Though it is important to note that as Woodruff becomes more and more comfortable with his drawing system, the illustrations and symbols are moved to the edge of the page for easy reference. This suggests that the symbols are not only attached to the date in which they appear, but they are to be read in connection with the text that either directly precedes or follows each symbol. This conclusion of such a use of symbols in journals is shared by Leonid Vermeer, who wrote, "These strategies can only be understood in their context, the immediate context of the text." To fully grasp the context of the symbols in Wilford Woodruff's journals, one must have an understanding of the purpose and format of this magnificent record. And so here we'll start with some just general images from the journals. First, the daily entry format of the journal is remarkably consistent. The journal consists of recording the date, often at the top and in the middle of the page. The date is then correlated with the date of the entry that comprised the first written line. Down the left margin of the page, the date, usually just the number of each entry, is indicated, which you can see in this picture here. In addition to daily entries, each new journal had a different title page that designated the dates of the entries and the volume number. While the format of that page evolved over time, the information was very consistent throughout those journals. So here's an example of one of those title pages. In addition to this title page, the journals themselves were helpful because they marked the beginning of each year and would work in tandem, with the year-end synopsis page that you can see on the screen. This unique aspect of the journals of Wilford Woodruff began in 1834. In each synopsis page, Woodruff catalogs and accounts for the unique events that happened throughout his year. As Woodruff wrote prior to his synopsis in 1835, the two following pages show correctly the abridgment of my journal, travels, and proceeding of the year 1835. The process by which Woodruff obtained the information for these synopsis pages is also recorded in a diary entry for the 31st of December, 1835. Here, Woodruff wrote, "On the night of the last day of December, and of the year of our Lord 1835, I pursued my journals, and found it to contain the following account of my travels and proceedings in the year 1835. I love that flowery language because it almost makes it sound as if he didn't put it there. The journal is accounting for it himself. And so I think that's one thing that we can all enjoy, is that sometimes these records take on a persona of themselves. This perusal may have actually persuaded Woodruff in 1837 to develop a system that would expedite the process of reviewing the previous year's events, with a specific eye on the events or experiences that he wanted to abridge on his year-end synopsis pages. As will be shown with the remainder of the time and discussion that we have, the correlation between the symbols and the year-end synopsis pages suggests that the system of symbols was indeed the solution to Wilford Woodruff's issues. Each of these components, the symbols, the title page, the daily markings, and the year-end synopsis, worked in tandem to assist Wilford Woodruff in creating a record that could be viewed quickly as a whole and referenced even quicker. While this information would have been valuable to Woodruff on an individual level, like many of the diaries of the 19th century that I've had the opportunity to study in the last 10 years, he viewed his journal as being about more than himself. On the 1st of January 1872, Woodruff identified himself as Wilford Woodruff, the journalist of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to watch and record. I love that commitment there from Wilford Woodruff. This view is seen in many other diaries from the time, leading Rudolf Decker and Arian Baggerman to conclude most diaries were not intimate, but gave more information about weather or social visits. The primary function of these diaries was to control time in a rapidly changing society. Woodruff's journal fits neatly into just such a context, and the symbols that he created helped to organize it for himself and others to review, especially his sons, to whom the journals would eventually be given with the caveat that they use them to, quote, direct what shall go into my biography or history, should they determine to publish it, and to superintend and control such a publication, close quote. So understanding the purpose, the format, and the intent of Woodruff's journals brings us to the symbols themselves. Originating with the entry of the 6th of February 1838, Wilford Woodruff began using 18 repeating symbols throughout his journals. These symbols appear a minimum of 8,100 times throughout the corpus, and are best understood when first viewed in the context of each journal entry, second, compared to the categories outlined in the year-end synopsis pages, and third, visually discerned as to determine what each symbol is a representation of. In the discussion that follows, we will explore the visual and textual meaning behind 10 of these 18 symbols. It will become clear that these 10 repeating symbols serve as a fitting example of how the symbols were drawn as markers to assist Woodruff in reviewing his journals and creating synopsis pages at the end of each calendrical year without having to read each journal entry. So let's dive in. The first symbol that we'll talk about is the symbol of a hand. This most utilized symbol in Woodruff's journals is the symbol that resembles an open hand. As can be seen in the cropped photo of a symbol taken from a journal entry in 1838, the design of the hand is very apparent, consisting of the cuff of a shirt and 5 open fingers. However, as you can see in the entry below, by the 3 repeated drawings, this symbol in 1872 had taken on a completely different characteristic, likely due to time restraints of wanting to finish. Woodruff took considerably less time to draw the symbols as time passed. This symbol accounts for more than 1/3 of all symbols drawn in Wilford Woodruff's journals, and almost always appears in the context of writing a letter. One of the categories Woodruff faithfully accounted each year in his year-end synopsis page. Speaking of letters, we can move to a second example of a letter that you can see here. And there's 4 different examples from varying times throughout Woodruff's journals. The second most frequently drawn symbol is that appears to be a folded letter. While the symbol appears to have a more consistent, maintained structure and shape, other than in opposition to the hand, a peculiar component to each symbol is the varying numbers of dots or lines that appear in each square. Almost always, and I want to emphasize that almost because there are some times it doesn't correlate, this symbol appears in context of entering, recording the reception of a letter or a package. Another category that Woodruff was meticulous in keeping an account of at the end of each year. Viewing this symbol in the context of each of Woodruff's daily entries, it appears that the varying numbers of dots and lines may actually represent the number of letters received, allowing Woodruff to only draw a single symbol, but to quickly account for the number of letters that he received each time. So you can see on these images across the middle of the screen, you've got a square with 1 dot, and the entry that follows says, I received 1 letter today. The next one has 3 dots, the next one has 4, and then the one on the far right side, I don't quite know what to do with because it looks like the lines kind of got outside of the box, but that's okay. So that is a second symbol that we frequently see within Wilford Woodruff's journals. A third symbol is a symbol that appears to be a crown. Used at least 416 times, this symbol resembles a crown and is frequently found in connection with discussions about the temple. However, Woodruff's year-end synopsis pages contain infrequent references to temple ordinances prior to 1858, with 1844 and 1854 being the only exceptions. The context of this symbol's appearance may also relate to the apostleship in these other years where temple ordinances are not recorded in the year-end synopsis pages, and be representations of the mantle of leadership assumed by those in the quorum. Frequently, meetings of the Quorum of the 12 are mentioned alongside this symbol, and those meetings are faithfully recorded at the end of each year in the synopsis pages, annually accounting for the number of meetings that Wilford Woodruff attended with his fellow apostles. It is likely that this symbol related both to council meetings and temple ordinances. A fourth symbol that I'd like to look at today is the bow and arrow. Appearing approximately 440 times in Woodruff's journals, this symbol frequently is accompanied with a heart. This is the first symbol that we've encountered so far that appears to be frequently used, but does not have any connection with the year-end synopsis pages. Each time this symbol appears, Woodruff recounts a dangerous circumstance, either by individuals or, more frequently, by the United States government. In this context, the symbol was a reminder of the aggression against the saints politically. While the context in which the symbol appears is wrought with discussions of the persecutions faced by the saints, the symbol also could be drawing upon biblical imagery. Now you can find out that I do have to fall back to my Old Testament roots as well. Because in the book of Psalms, the psalmist records, if he turn not, he will whet his sword. He has bent his bow and made it ready. That's from Psalm 7:2. Such an image and interpretation is apparent in one of the illustrations of Woodruff, one of the illustrations by Woodruff that is not commonly used on the 15th of May, 1842. Here, upon hearing reports that Lilburn W. Boggs had been killed, Woodruff drew this image, which incorporates the bow and the arrow with the human head being the target. And right now, I'm really, like, if my father was here, he'd say, Josh, you really have to quote a song here, shot through the heart. Sorry, but that's for my father. Woodruff drew this image, which incorporates the bow and arrow. After recounting the news that Boggs had been shot, Woodruff records this: "Thus this ungodly wretch has fallen in the midst of his iniquity, and the vengeance of God is taken him at last." Now, for those who are historians, you know that this actually didn't happen, and the reports were exaggerated to some extent, and Boggs did live through that event. But I think it helps us to be able to see what Wilford Woodruff was feeling, more so than just what he was seeing. A fifth symbol. Unlike any other symbols, this one resembles a human being, and here's Queen Victoria again. This one appears in numerous variants. The one that you see here is the representation of Queen Victoria, whom Woodruff saw from a distance while serving as a missionary in England. These symbols are the most elaborate and complex of the Woodruff symbols. Only appearing 49 times in his journals, this symbol does not represent a single person or thing, but is a representation of times in which Woodruff interacted with people he viewed as being of great worth, from the Queen of England to a newly born family member. Like the symbol of the bow and the arrow, this symbol is not connected with the year-end synopsis categories, but appears to assist in guiding a reader through Woodruff's journals to important moments in his life. And maybe, as a side note, more important than that, to important people that was in his life. And I think relationships were at the center of a lot of these. A sixth symbol, various iterations of this symbol are seen throughout the Woodruff journals, and I've given you a couple here. And while they are different between their visual appearance, each of them are associated with the authority to lead and direct the church and administer the ordinances thereof. In a statement made in 1889, Woodruff declared, "I am the last man living who heard the prophet Joseph Smith say, 'All the keys and powers that God had bestowed upon me.' The association of keys with the authority given to those who preside and officiate in the church led Woodruff to place keys next to his recordings of sermons given by them. While these sermons were not included in the year-end synopsis, Woodruff was diligent in compiling records of key teachings from the senior leadership of the church. Utilizing keys would have been helpful for moments when he transferred authoritative teachings to other record books, including the 1841-1842 Book of Revelations, which is the quote at the bottom of this slide. It is from this source that the bottom picture is taken, showing that Woodruff used some of these symbols outside of the context of his journal. So you can see the key there, and this is preceding one of the revelations that Wilford Woodruff recorded in his Revelation book. A seventh symbol that should be fairly apparent to all of us appears 200 times through the Wilford Woodruff journals and is always in reference to death, specifically for the death of those close to Wilford. While this symbol has its self-explanatory use, it is employed in two ways as shown here. For some of those who had died, Woodruff draws a small coffin with only the initials of the deceased. The second form is a larger coffin in which more detail is given, including the age and death date or the position of responsibility the deceased individual held, as is the case with the 13 July 1844 account of the martyrdom of Joseph and Hiram Smith. Keep in mind, Woodruff was out serving for the church and helping to perpetuate Joseph Smith's run for president. And so he was away from Nauvoo, and so the news took a couple of weeks to get to him, and so this entry appears a few weeks after the martyrdom. There are a couple of occasions where the symbol is used, and I found these just absolutely humorous. For example, on the 17th of February 1841, Woodruff visited a cadaver lab and used the coffin as a symbol to commemorate that event. And on the 27th of January 1862, he recounted the acts of grave robbers in the Salt Lake City Cemetery and used the coffin as a symbol to remember that entry. Woodruff's year-end synopsis page has a category for the attendance of funerals or the giving of funeral sermons, but the numbers never reach the number of the symbols that were drawn. This may be due to the fact that Woodruff would record the death of a loved one, even if they were not close enough for him to attend the funeral, compensating for the discrepancy in the numbers. Symbol 8 resembles an architectural structure or a building that is only drawn 25 times throughout the journals, but all are written in the context of visiting, moving from, or moving into a new structure, as can be seen in this entry from the 6th of February 1844. Additionally, this symbol is used by Woodruff later here in the Salt Lake Valley when it is used every time that he dedicates a building. Oftentimes, a number that he tracked in his year-end synopsis pages. The ninth symbol I'd like us to look at today is a heart. Throughout Woodruff's journals, this symbol of a heart appears as a connection to the teachings and doctrine of eternal unions and families, eternal friendship, the doctrine of sealing, and an assurance that through the ordinances one can have again those whom they have lost in mortality. The use of this symbol by Woodruff provides any who read his journals the opportunity to learn about the development and reality of the doctrine of eternal relationships. Like some of the frequently used symbols, there is no direct correlation between this symbol and the year-end synopsis pages, but emphasizes the importance of seeing an eternal perspective on our relationships. As can be seen by the center heart here, this was drawn on the 30th of January, 1844, the day that Wilford and Phoebe Woodruff were sealed for time and for all eternity. A final symbol that I would like us to look at today is an example of the drawings that were used only for a short period of time. This symbol, 12 circled stars, only appears 5 times from the 8th of August, 1844 to the 24th of August, 1844, and always appears in the context of meetings of the Quorum of the 12, not unlike the symbol of the crown. As you may recall, this is the period directly following the death of Joseph Smith, when the 12 apostles collectively assumed the leadership of the church. The symbol's discontinuance after the 24th of August of 1844 is an indication that the Quorum of the 12 did not meet again until the conference that was held on the 6th of October, 1844, when Brigham Young was sustained as the president of that quorum, thus effectively ending the brief period when the leaders of the church were collectively the 12, and not upon simply the quorum president, as has become the case during each apostolic interregnum. The choice of the circling of 12 stars is a symbol that may be familiar to some of you, as it would later be incorporated on a proposed flag for the territory of Deseret. Although these symbols are distinct in their use and function, there appears to be 3 primary themes that bind them together: the importance of family, the importance of relationships, and the necessity of priesthood keys. 3 topics that appear to be of most worth to Woodruff. Well, this opportunity has provided me the chance to introduce my research of these nearly 9,000 drawings. It just scratches the surface on what drawings can teach us about Wilford Woodruff and the early history of the church, providing a fruitful field of research for years to come. A more detailed analysis of these illustrations and symbols will appear in the coming months through BYU Studies. And additionally, an index of all of these symbols will be published on the Wilford Woodruff Papers website to be an accessible source to all interested parties. Thank you.